everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unsubscribe, the Demand Drive podcast. I'm your host, AJ Alonso. Got my co-host with me, Alex Ellison. How we doing, Alex?
We're doing good. We were just talking before this about how dark it is in the wintertime, especially in the three places we all live. But the sun's out right now where I am specifically, so I'm doing good.
I got sun too. 2 for 3. I think our guest is dealing with 0 sun. We've got Christian Erba Springorum. He's an AE over at Contractbook. We're going to talk about overcoming some hesitancy and fear with cold calling, making it your greatest weapon. But Christian, I really did want to start off and ask you about the sun. How do you feel about it? How do you feel about the lack of the sun right now? I know in Denmark, it's not not the funnest time of year.
Yeah, and guys, thank you so much for having me. It is dark as it's crazy dark. It's dark like you can't see 10 meters away, kind of dark. I do miss the sun right now. Denmark is not famous for being particularly sunny in the winter, but at least they have cozy environments and pretty good food, so it kind of compensates there.
It all evens out. Well, hopefully we can brighten up your evening a little bit by recording some sweet podcast content. So like I mentioned, I wanted to talk with you about cold calling, specifically how you kind of overcame a lot of the fear and hesitancy that most reps deal with when they first start out as SDRs and kind of jump into that role, how you turned it into a weapon of yours. But before we kind of dig into the meat of the conversation, if people don't at this point know who you are in some capacity, give people a bit of a background about yourself, kind of how you got into sales, a bit about your journey before we jump in.
Well, yeah, no, for sure. I feel like I'm not being particularly original here, but like a lot of people, I fell into sales. It was the first actual job that I found here in Copenhagen. And it was like, yeah, I decided to stay here because of love. And then I was like, well, I need a job if I'm going to stay here, right? And then kind of funny enough, then I fell in love with that as well. And now I'm just on this crazy journey from BDR to AE and just getting the hang of that.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, it's funny that we call it falling into sales, because typically when you ask someone how they got into it, they're like, I fell into it and then I loved it. So like, did you really fall down or did you like fall up? I guess you would say, like, you know, you were like, well, this is, I guess, what I'm going to do now. And then all of a sudden you're like, holy cow, I actually really enjoy this. And now I'm making a career out of it. So happy that you
falling up.
Yeah. Falling up. You fell up into sales.
You can fall into a good thing.
That's fair. Maybe I'm reading too much into this. What are we going to do? It's my nature. So I wanted to talk about, I guess, maybe when you are an AE now, when you first started as an SDR, like a lot of SDRs, you got into it and you were a bit hesitant about cold calling. During the pre-show, you talked about how you were not the biggest fan of it. I don't know too many people who jump into sales and immediately love cold calling. Talk me through that. Talk about your overall mentality kind of going into it, how you were able to overcome some of that. Maybe some of the limitations you had early on that looking back now you would maybe fix if you could, speak to yourself in the past.
Yeah, no, you could definitely say, I mean, I wasn't in love with cold calling. You have to be pretty crazy to love the idea of calling someone out of the blue, someone incredibly busy, and be like, hey, want to buy something? But that's the problem, right? That's what my perception of cold calling was. It was kind of trying to push a product on people that could go without it. But then that kind of changed with time. I mean, the first thing that I kind of had to get over was the fear, right? Because fear just doesn't make anything enjoyable. Mm-hmm. If you're scared and going into something, like, sure, you can be a little nervous, but the genuine fear that I felt at the start, I had to get over it. And that's when I just started to, I know it's pretty actually crazy to hear it, but yeah, I was very scared of doing it, but then I started making 100 dials a day, right? And my heart was in my stomach and my voice was shaking. I was like, hey, this is, and they would be, you know, like, but what this did, it made me quickly realize how the worst thing that can happen to me is getting yelled at and getting hung up on. And if you do that enough times, you kind of grow numb to it. And then that's when I actually started like having fun with it, because once you realize that it's just people yelling at you or hanging up on you, you could even laugh it off, right? Like, oh, that person was a little grumpy.
Oh, yeah.
I've now reached a point where I call them up again. I'm sorry, the line must have dropped, you know, and more times than not, they don't pick up. One time I got a pickup and the guy insulted me, but I mean that's part of the gig,
That's
right?
the way it goes.
So yeah, so definitely, because one thing that I quickly realized was that there is this thing called phone phobia, where people are afraid of actually picking up the phone because they're scared of. So they're like, oh, I'll just write an email instead, right? Um, but um, but the best way to get over it is jumping right into it, and it's going to be uncomfortable. It was incredibly uncomfortable. Um, but then right after that, I realized, wow, okay, this is actually amazing. This is where most of my meetings are coming from, and I just doubled down on it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was just going to ask Alex before you jump in, like you say you realized it, right? Like you're like, oh, cold calling is actually something that I should be doing because XYZ. And for you, you realized it because you were getting more meetings via calls than via emails. When did that sort of happen for you? I know you said that you kind of just like brute force, kind of forced yourself to not be afraid of it by making a ton of dials a day and becoming numb to it. Was it during that process where you were like, oh, this actually works? Or like, did you kind of know that going into the process of making a ton of dials because you just wanted to make it work?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good one. No, so I think that it kind of happened, like it was like a bit of a perfect storm of well, me just I realized you can't get good at everything, right? So I was like, I need to focus one channel of outbound, whether it's LinkedIn, emails, or calls. And I realized that my emails were atrocious. So I was like, cold calling is the quickest, how can I say, I can pull up a list of old leads in our CRM, and just literally of old closed lost, or just people that haven't ever been reached out, and just rip the phones, right? So it was really quick. I could practice in it, right? I didn't have to send out emails, and which I would get no reply on. So that was like, okay, I realized my emails are bad. Cold calling is kind of have like an easier barrier to entry, so I'm just gonna double down on that. And once I realized, yeah, it's not that bad, then I just really got into it, and almost went into a I wouldn't say fanatical approach, but I was trying to read up as much as possible about it. You know, how can I improve not only what I'm saying, but how I'm saying it.
Hmm.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Excuse me. The question I was gonna say, AJ, is a little bit similar, but I'm really interested in that mindset you have when you decided to start making 100 dials a day, because you said, eventually you realized it worked after you were doing it. But what did it take to really say and sit down and say, like, all right, like there's nothing else left to do. I'm out of excuses. Like I have to do this. Was it management support? Was it really just like flipping a switch in your own head? What was going on in your head there?
Quota.
That's the ever looming pressure of quota. I feel like is always there.
True.
Yeah, no, but actually that's a great one. I think it was both what I was seeing on LinkedIn, in terms of where people got the most results, but at the same time it was a personal kind of realization. Hey, let's. Yeah, so how I approach it was like, let's crash and burn quickly as much as possible, right? Like this, I can grow later. And that's the kind of mindset I had, is like, if I mess up a lot now, I will benefit it. I will benefit down the line. And because of that, and let me be incredibly clear, I messed up so much. Like they were terrible. I wish I could actually go back and listen to my calls, because a lot of, unfortunately, I'm not sure I can, but they were terrible. But with each failed call, I learned a little more, right? And because I was doubling down on it and I wasn't focusing on emails or LinkedIn, that's essentially almost all I was doing. Now, is it is it healthy to do 100 dials a day, 80 dials a day? I wouldn't say so. I think that it's a great way to quickly realize where you can improve, and like I mentioned, numb yourself. Um, so yeah, quota and just a drive to get better at it.
Yeah, I think that mindset is so important, because you can tell anybody who's trying to become a good SDR, hey, sit down and make 100 dials a day. And if you don't have that mindset, that forethought of like, okay, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to fail a bunch and learn from it, and then use that to continue to get better at this, you'll just be making 100 dials like into the void, get hung up on a bunch, get rejected, not really have the opportunity to if you don't have that mindset to grow and learn from it, you're just going to be miserable all the time. Like, the role itself is incredibly difficult. And if you let it get to you, it will. There's just no way about it. Like, you will, if you let the role kind of like take over your psyche and sort of like beat you down, it's not going to relent. You're not going to be able to find the silver lining. That mindset that you had, I think, is so important, realizing like, this is where the money is, right? Like, I see people talk about this on LinkedIn. I'm reading books about it. Like, if I want to succeed, I have to be able to use this as a learning mechanism to get better. Otherwise, you're just going to get beat down over and over again. And then people have that like, well, I guess sales isn't for me kind of realization, and they leave the profession altogether. So talk a little bit more about, I guess, like that mindset of continuous growth and learning. Like you said, you were reading a bunch of books, you're on LinkedIn. Like, what made you kind of dive into that world outside of like the mindset that you already had? And what are some of the resources that you took a look at that really helped you kind of cultivate and develop that mindset for growth?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is a huge part of the knowledge that I kind of picked and chose to help me there, right? I think that there is a bunch of incredibly talented and way more experienced salespeople, right, that have been doing this for years. And if the senior vice president of a company is telling you, hey, cold call, I'm going to go and say, you know what, I'm going to go and cold call. But then, of course, like you mentioned before, it's so easy to get a new BDR and tell them call with no guidance. So, of course, I was there like extracting some nuggets here and there, how to objection handle, how to how my tone was supposed to be, and what the hook should sound like, how to do my research. And yeah, with time you just do these little tweaks, and something like beautiful comes out of it, and you realize, wow, I love this. I love something that people hate so much, and I don't understand why they hate, because yeah, like we were mentioning, it is a revenue generating activity. It's, for me, it's the most important part of outbounding, because it is so easy to brush off a cold email, and it's so easy to brush off a DM. I mean, I would it's a lot harder to brush off a door to door, but I can't go door to door, to SaaS companies in all of Europe. So I'm going to call them up, and I'm going to lead with enough value where they're going to realize, oh, okay, this makes sense for me to continue. And LinkedIn it was my biggest source of inspiration.
Yeah, there's like a theory into practice portion that you were talking about there that I think really resonates with me. I know a lot of, and we've talked about this on different episodes of the podcast, but like the critical thinking component of sales, I think, is something that gets lost on a lot of reps, because they get told to do what you do. Go on LinkedIn, see what other people are doing, figure out why it works for them, and then, take it back and try it on your own. And there's this mentality of like, okay, well, I'll just copy what they're doing. And if it doesn't work for me, then I'll find something else and I'll copy that and keep going. But it's something that you should be emulating, not copying. And for you, it sounds like you were reading what people were doing, seeing how they were successful, trying it out, learning from it, and then continuing to iterate on that process, like the theory, and then putting it into practice, and then putting it back into theory, into practice, like this little cycle of self-learning for yourself. I think that's so incredibly important and lost for a lot of SDRs today. I don't know if you can kind of speak to that about how you kind of went through that process, learning and growing there.
Yeah, and like you and practice and practice and practice, right? If you compare it to athletes, they practice all the time, but the game is just an hour, right? And you look at it in the game, and they're like, oh my God, these guys are amazing. Sure, they're amazing because they've practiced and practiced and practiced. So you can spend years reading books. Let's say you could spend days reading how to fly, right? But if you don't actually get behind the plane and actually try it, you're never going to fly. And this is one thing that I noticed about a lot of the theory behind cold calling and the research that people do is that then they don't actually practice it. So they're like, oh yeah, sure, this is amazing, like boom, 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 great points. Then they do 20 calls, it doesn't work. I'll forget about that.
Mm-hmm.
You need a wider pool of how experiments, they have big trials because you need to go and say for certain, okay, this doesn't work, so yeah, no, I can't stress enough about how much you should get into it and just pick up the phone and go, because the call is not going to be perfect. Like I mentioned, mine weren't. I started cold calling 1 week in. I had no idea what we were selling. And I still sometimes manage to get them in a meeting. And then I remember my AE would be like, yeah, I don't really know what the hell is going on with this one. And I'm like, yeah, sorry. But at least I'm getting the practice in talking to people, right? And not feeling shy. So yeah.
Is there like sort of a sample size that you did look to do when you were trying something new or adding something to your cadence? Was there like, I need to try this out X number of times before I can decide whether or not it's a good strategy?
Yeah, great question. I don't think I had like an exact idea of I have to make X calls to validate the theory that this is a good approach. What I would do is I would add it into my, let's say, sequence. So I would say, okay, how is my intro, hook, and objection handling and closing? So I wouldn't go in and change it all at once. I would just change one thing, and I would say that I would try it at least for a week. And you can already know when you see it, for example, on LinkedIn, if it's going to be a solid piece of advice, if it's actually going to work. And the things that worked are now part of my go-to. And the things that are not, it's just like, I'll never use them. Like, for example, I'll never say, how are you on a cold call. I just think that it triggers instantly sales resistance, and they're just going to be like, nope, right?
How are you? No. All right.
No.
Yeah, that's not really the answer I was looking for. I'm curious because you've obviously consumed a ton of content, books, LinkedIn, etc. Like you said, you've probably at this point read enough of like that idea of like you can read 1 million books on how to fly, but if you never fly, you're not going to do it. Like you've read 1 million pieces of content on how to cold call, and now you're also active on LinkedIn. You're sharing your own advice and examples and insights on how to do that. How has that helped you in your journey? I know kind of moving from SDR to account executive, that jump is often met with a lot of stuff that you didn't know you had to know moving into the AE role. Do you think that not only consuming, but creating content online for other people helped you make that transition? Talk to me a little bit about that.
I would say that LinkedIn is a misunderstood gold mine. I say it like this because a lot of people that are not active on LinkedIn don't truly understand the value there. Before being active, I just thought that it was a place where you would announce your job promotion, and that's it, right? But then I started actually looking into, like, let's call it sales LinkedIn. And I realized that it's so much more. It's this kind of network of professionals sharing their insights and failures, successes, connecting that eventually in real life. So it kind of, what it did, it held me accountable, right? So when I start talking about cold calling on LinkedIn, I better be sure to be good at it. I'm never going to go on LinkedIn and tell you how to do an incredible discovery / negotiation, because I'm 1 month, sorry, into the AE role. But so it kind of made me accountable to, like, I can't be giving out here tips and getting the phone slammed on me on every call, right? Um, so I would say that that's one way in which it kind of helped me posting on LinkedIn. And then also, by being active on LinkedIn, you can quickly DM great creators that you have exchanged with, and then the conversation becomes even more personal and even more. I've connected on, like, calls, and where we just talk about, well, of course, ourselves, but like cold calling, and there's some great information there that then they don't share on LinkedIn. So yeah, I would definitely say that if you haven't already, check it out. You don't have to post from day one. I was just commenting a bit, liking, and see how that feels. But I would highly recommend giving it a try.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like you're right that there are a lot of different sides to LinkedIn, and depending on what your job is, affects how involved you are with it. I know that we've seen a lot of SDRs use LinkedIn successfully, but it's to do their SDR job, right? And I think that's an important distinction to make, where you do that, right? You connect with your prospects on LinkedIn, I assume, but you're also connecting with sales leaders and people with advice that you like and people you're interested in following, because there's that whole other side that's just like, oh, these people all just want to help. This is just a social media platform at the end of the day for business, and the people that are posting are the people that want to share their knowledge. So being able to tap into that, and even, like you said, get to the point where you can reach out to them and have a one-on-one conversation about a post that they just made, I think is a great way to learn that I think a lot of even salespeople and SDRs on LinkedIn don't really take the time to look at. So I love that.
That's another realization where we salespeople, I could see we approached LinkedIn as a connect and pitch slap. And I got the beauty of 0 meetings booked out of it in 5 months. And I was like, this is not how LinkedIn should be used. And with time, I realized there's so much more about it. And the amount of, almost, I would call them inbounds, that I get because of my posting on LinkedIn is crazy, right? Like, hey, love your content, quickly checked out Contractbook, could you tell me more? And I can guarantee you that if it was a connect and pitch slap, they would have completely ignored it. And I realized it when it happened to me, right? An amazing thing that can happen to a sales rep is to get cold outbounded, because you realize how bad it can be. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing exactly that. I gotta change it ASAP, you know?
That's a really good point. I as someone who used to be an SDR for many years and made that jump into marketing, as soon as you change your title to something that looks like you could sell something to me, the amount of times I got prospected ramped up by like 10. There's just like constant cold calls. I don't get prospected a ton, but like way more than when I was an SDR title. And you're right. Like there's something about being a constant practitioner of prospecting that when someone does it to you, you get to pick out and see sort of like, oh, like they said this thing that I also always said, and it bothered me. And I'm not putting myself in my prospect shoes and thinking like, is this going to bother everyone that I say it to? Or I look at a lot of cold emails that I get and I'm like, wow, I used to start my emails just like that. And when I get them, I hate it. Like, I've made a huge mistake. So I think that there is something to that, like seeing what other people are doing and getting prospected yourself illuminates a lot of the stuff that maybe you would change. And to your point earlier, like the experimentation of it and being like, well, if I do change my hook or the tone that I'm using and I do it for a week and I see like actual positive change, then yeah, maybe I'm onto something here and I can kind of keep baking this into my prospecting process moving forward. So do you think that all sort of like sales leaders or AEs are doing that? Or is that something that when you are talking to these people and they are maybe still actively prospecting, is it common for them to take what other people are giving them and tweak it and try it on their own? Or I don't know, give me your opinion on that.
I mean, I would hope that they do, and I'm sure that I do it. Now that does not mean that necessarily they do too. But what I realized is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel in sales. There is a reason why successful sales reps are successful, and that's because they do the basics day in and day out. The way in which they talk, lead a discovery. Now let's go actually top of funnel. The way in which they cold call, and then again, lead a discovery and ask the right questions, demo the product. It's just done. Follow-up emails. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But what's great about it is that when you then have that foundation, you can build upon it. And that's when it gets really fun, because then you're not repeating the words of someone else. Then you're adding your flair, right? And so I really do hope that people are doing it. And I'm sure that I've actually spoken with a connection recently, and we both agree. We're talking about great objection handlings, and we literally saw the same video in which this one rep said like, "Oh, we have a solution in place, right?" And instantly like, "Oh, great! What do you love about it?" And this is something that just is so well put together that is like, of course I'm going to try it out, right? And then with time, it's not going to be, oh, what do you love about it? I'm going to add my let's call it personalization into it. But it's hard to pass on a really good objection handling like that. So definitely take inspiration.
Yeah. Obviously, foundationally, you've built up a solid one in terms of your time as an SDR, learning how to cold call, kind of like pulling all that together. And now you're layering stuff on top of it that is personal to you. What are some things that you're doing different from other AEs or individual contributors out there that makes you successful, that maybe advice-wise we want to pass on to anyone listening to this?
Never stop prospecting. I would say that is it's so easy to, of course it says never stop prospecting. Like literally daily prospecting is so successful AEs have always filled pipelines. That's the bottom line, is no matter how, because one deal can fall through, they've got 3 other ready to go. And if you approach, if you are in a place where you get inbounds and you have SDRs, it's so easy to be like, oh yeah, I'll wait, I'll get the SDRs to book me.
Funnel for me.
Right? And what happens when they cut marketing spend by 30%? Or what happens when, or what happens if SDRs were to leave? Or what happens if they pair you with a new SDR, right? There are so many things that are outside of your control. So I would say that I can't speak to my skills yet. I would say after the in running the meeting, because I'm still learning that, and I'm pretty happy with how it's going, but it's a learning curve, just like with the cold calls. But I would definitely say day in, day out prospect, even if it's just one account. Ideally make it 5. But it does kind of always make sure that if it's done right, you can always have something to fall back on and inbounds and SDRs are bonuses. So I realized I started almost at the same time as another AE, and she was not put on the inbound flow yet, and neither was I. So she was, and I had like, I don't know, 11 meetings booked for November. And she was like, "Oh, but I didn't have any. I still thought that I was gonna get on the inbound." And because of that, I had so much practice and so many mistakes that I could do with outbounds. That when the good stuff is coming in from now, of course, it's hopefully also the outbound becomes good stuff. But um, let's put it this way: when the leads that a company has spent money on put in front of you, you're ready for them.
That I love that mentality, and it's something that I've heard a bunch. Like, you're realistically, AEs get paid a good amount of money, like more than an SDR does, and you want to make sure that like the leads that you pay money, like you said, to bring into the business to give to your higher paid AEs, you want those to go well. Like, you don't want someone to just practice on those. Like, you get the ability and opportunity to practice on some outbound accounts, and like you said, figure out the discovery process, really nail down like how you can effectively run that post first meeting agenda, and like run a demo. Like, you practice on those types of accounts, and then when you get put on the inbound and the company's like, sick, we paid money for these, like, make them good, you have that practice to be able to go through it. I think that's so important for not just like keeping your own pipeline full, but like constantly being a practitioner of prospecting, so that you refine to the point where like high level target account inbounds, you nail it first try. You don't have to worry about it.
Exactly. Definitely that. And the nerves kind of go down. If you've already done it 10 times, then when a lead comes in, you're like, okay, I'm ready to go, right? Then of course the nerves are always going to be there, but I mean, that's part of the game.
Yeah, they'll always be there. Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you one last question. It came up during the pre-show, and I'm wondering if you still do this, because we spoke a little while ago, but I asked you if there was anything like advice-wise that you would kind of give to yourself, or something that you do that maybe isn't super common amongst a lot of other reps. And you said that you were actively trying to change it, but you didn't do any cold calling blocks. And as an SDR, you would just call whenever you kind of felt like it, whenever the moment was opportune to do so. Has that changed? Do you now like more kind of rigidly structure your calendar? Talk about some of the benefits of being able to do that, and sort of how it makes cold calling a bit easier or doesn't impact it.
Yeah, no, yeah. I think that I'm doing now a 360 degree from when we first spoke to now, because it is, like as an SDR, I was, people always kind of get hooked up on the fact, oh, when's the best time to call? And I just realized that if you're doing 100 dials, it doesn't really matter, because it's so many dials. So I was just calling throughout the day whenever I felt like it, and then I'd be like, oh, I'm going to do 25 dials, go play some ping pong, come back, do more dials, go eat. It's day and night now. I just don't have time for that. It's like I need to put that time block in where for that 30 minutes, 1 hour, I've now kind of structured it where I have 2 call blocks. That is all I'm doing, because now the amount of work that kind of came in becoming an AE, it's just day and night. And that's something also that I just completely underestimated, how much admin goes into being an AE, right? So I was there ripping the phones. Yep, interested? Great. Here's the demo. Just pass it on to the AE, right? Just make sure that they're in the right calendar. Now you have to craft follow-up emails and stakeholder management and maybe 3-4 more demos. And it's I can't just be doing. So I was cold calling while doing other stuff, right? I was answering LinkedIn comments or I was like sending out an email. Incredibly not recommended. So no, I would definitely say time block and cherish that time. That is that's the money time right there. As an SDR, that's because SDRs get paid by meetings booked or qualified opportunities. So really cherish that time, and make it fun, right? Make a game out of it with your colleagues. Bet on it. Well, one time we made a bet that who would book the most meetings would get, well, who booked the least meetings had to pay for lunch for the others. And I think that time I might have actually had to pay for lunch. I can't remember, but it kind of makes it fun because prospecting is tough. So making sure that you're entertaining yourself while doing it is also very important.
Yeah, I love that. Anytime you can make it a game, I'm a big fan of that.
Exactly. Now you can't be messing around too much. I mean, it's still work, right? But
yeah, all of a sudden you look down and you're like, oh, I've only made 13 dials today.
Yeah,
a little bit too much time in the game. No, that's great advice. As we wrap up, I know we've talked about a lot of stuff in terms of overcoming some reluctance for cold calling, kind of getting your hands dirty, theory into practice. If there was one thing that you wanted someone listening to this episode to take away from it, maybe they're an individual contributor, they're not super comfortable with cold calling, or they want to make it more of a valuable activity for them, what's one thing that they should pull away from this episode and take back with them?
Pick up the phone and you're 50% of the way there. Just you acknowledging, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm picking up the phone. You are way more ahead than you think. Cold calling can really look like a mountain that is almost, for some reps, is just like unachievable. But I just wanted to make it clear that when you're there on the phone and that phone is ringing, you're 50% of the way there. When they pick up, right, 60, and then we can just kind of like they're interested in hearing you, right, 70. So the hardest challenge is actually doing it. And so no matter how much research you do and how much practice you could do in doing mock calls, I would kind of like, yeah, that's great, but just pick up the phone and great things will follow.
Love it. That's good stuff. Well, thanks again, Christian, for being here. Really appreciate your time. If people want to get in touch with you, learn more about yourself, Contractbook, maybe continue the conversation and ask you some questions or get some advice. I know you talked about you being on LinkedIn. How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would definitely say LinkedIn would be the best way. I'm very active on there. I'm trying to post daily, but it's really hard right now. I answer to almost every DM. It's starting to get a little difficult now with just the volumes, but I really make it an effort where if someone reaches out, I'll reach back. Or cold call me, right? If you find my phone number somewhere, I would love a cold call. I promise I won't hang up on you if it's good.
Oh, okay, like D- hang up.
Yeah.
No, yeah. No, thanks for offering that up. Listeners, seriously, if you want to get some practice cold calling and you want to hit up a guy who knows what he's talking about, definitely find his phone number and give him a call. I think that'd be really fun. Thanks again for being here, Christian. Really appreciate it. Thank you, listener, for listening. Remember to subscribe, to unsubscribe, get more insights and tips like this in your inbox, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Christian.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching this episode of Unsubscribe, the Demand Drive podcast. If you want less of those nasty unsubscribe emails in your inbox, go ahead and check out some of the content we have to the left, and make sure that you subscribe to Unsubscribe to keep your SDR team in tip-top shape.